Hi, and welcome to another edition of Rabbi K's Cuts, visual blasts of wisdom on the weekly Torah portion. This week we read a double parsha, Tazria-Metzora. One of the primary concepts discussed at great length in the Torah portion is the idea of the Metzora. The Metzora being a leper, although not a leper in the conventional sense as we understand it, but a leper who, as the sages tell us, was expressing some kind of spiritual malady that took the form of a skin disease. And this was a very fascinating disease because at its core we know that the disease was attributable to an individual who spoke gossip. It's hard for us to imagine in today's society that the notion of lashon hara, of gossip, is such a profoundly negative one when we have entire industries that are predicated on that very characteristic. But the reality is, in Torah law, gossip, slander, speaking evilly or illy about another individual is considered of the gravest transactions. Well, what's interesting about this particular spiritual malady is that it required a Kohen, a priest, to come in as sort of a spiritual doctor, an evaluator of the condition of the individual suffering from this leprosy, from this tsaras, to determine or ascertain whether or not the lesions on the individual's skin were actually qualified as tsaras. In other words, it's possible for a person to have some kind of discoloration or lesions that were not tsaras. It required the expert evaluation of a Kohen to make that determination. The Torah tells us something very strange. It says that if the person suffering from this disease had a tsaras that spread, then the Kohen, the priest, would come in and be able to determine that this was in fact the tsaras disease. But if the person was covered completely by the discolorations, in that case, says the Torah, the Kohen must pronounce the person pure. And it's very strange. Obviously, we would think that if the person had 50% coverage and they were impure, that they were considered to be contaminated by this disease, then certainly if they were covered 100%, they should also be, all the more so, determined to be contaminated by this spiritual malady. What's it trying to teach us? What's the Torah telling us here? I heard a beautiful idea. You can read it on some of the links in Brother Laib's Parsha section online. He wrote a beautiful idea, and that is as follows. In order for a person to be declared to have tsaras, the Kohen has to come and understand that the person had done wrong. However, there is no person that is 100% evil, that is 100% bad in their actions. Every person has some kind of redeeming value. If the Kohen comes in and they can't see at least some part of the person that isn't covered, they can't see some part of the person that isn't suffering from these expressions of the spiritual negativity, then they're missing something. Then that's saying that there's something wrong with the Kohen, with the priest's vision of this individual. And how remarkable is it that lashon hara, evil speech, gossip, is a sin, is a transgression that comes from the individual looking negatively at other people and therefore having the ability to speak negatively about them. And yet the person diagnosing that condition himself has to have an attitude in which they're looking for the positive within the other person. Himself has to come to a point where if they see only bad, if they see only spiritual contamination, then they're missing something. There's a 5%, a 10%, something in each person that must be shining through, that must be retaining its goodness. Let us strive this week and all weeks, certainly during the period of the Sfiras HaOmer, where we're counting the Omer, and we one of the things that we do during this time period is we mourn the death of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, whose students perished because they didn't appreciate and respect one another sufficiently. They didn't look at each other with a favorable eye to the sufficient degree. Let us strive to look at our fellows our fellow Jews and our fellow humans in this world with a positive attitude, with a favorable attitude. And that we understand that even though nobody is perfect, everyone has something meaningful and positive to contribute. Let us try to focus on those aspects of others and try to highlight them, try to bring those out to a greater degree. And in doing so, we can create a world that will no longer tolerate an industry of gossip, an industry that is predicated on knocking down others, but a world that perhaps will have an industry of magazines and shows and culture that celebrates others, that celebrates the beauty and accomplishments of other people, those close to us, those not close to us, all those in our midst. Have a wonderful Shabbos.